So we'll move on to the next question. This is from Aaron. Thank you, Aaron. The political conversation is dominated by economic growth, as if it is the main goal of society and an end in itself. How can we make the goal people living with high well-being on a healthy planet and build the kind of economy which will deliver that goal? And I'd like to actually specifically ask, what will your party do around that? What will your political party do about that, changing or dealing with this domination of economic growth and thinking about a healthy planet? And I'd like to start with Tabi, because that kind of feels that's what Greens have been talking about, as others have.
Thank you so much. So something I'm really excited about actually is alternative economic models. So I'm a particular fan of the donut economic model, which I really recommend people checking out because it's really exciting. It's basically the fact that we have this science of economics, but it's not really necessarily grounded in reality. It kind of takes as given the fact that we can have infinite, endless growth, and that's obviously not going to be possible on a finite planet with finite resources. So basically the donut economic model kind of takes into account the fact that there are certain metrics we can't overshoot and other things that we kind of want to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind either. So I could easily just spend 5 minutes explaining this, but I don't really want to. I really, really recommend you guys check it out. Kate Raworth's model is really good. But in some ways just exploring alternatives to the status quo and kind of thinking, again, what are we actually looking for growth in? Unfortunately, we're in a situation where there's kind of a lot of conflicts. You can't really grow the number of cars, for instance, if you also want to grow the number of bikes, because they kind of defeat each other. So you kind of want to make sure that you are doing the responsible thing in terms of that. I kind of feel as though capitalism has kind of hit major limits just in terms of the fact that we tend to just go and extract from other places. Just the fact that it was mentioned earlier that, China's emissions are so much more than ours. Well, it's because we actually outsourced most of our manufacturing to China. It's not okay to just say, oh, well, poor silly Chinese people, they've actually just polluted their own waterways and their own air, and it's all their fault. We're driving demand for that, so let's try and own that, please. I just kind of feel as though we kind of need to dismantle and decolonize quite a lot of the assumptions that we already have about our economy. And I could definitely talk for hours about that, but I just really wanted to bring that into the conversation and discussion. I think a lot of Greens do talk about it. You do need to have that just transition. You do need to have equity as well. And, just in terms of bringing everyone on the planet with us, really.
Thank you. And I'd actually like to pass to Ian, because what do businesses think about the economic models?
Well, obviously growth is, economic growth is traditionally the lifeblood of business. But most small businesses are actually started for other reasons other than making a lot of money. Typically, when you talk to small business owners, there are many, many reasons why they're running their business. And yes, money makes it go round, but it's very often much more personal or community reasons for doing what they're doing. But from a business point of view, I'm reminded of the words of one of the business guru, Peter Drucker, who said what gets measured gets managed. And quite simply, we need to have more sophisticated measures than simply GDP. If we look to the country of Bhutan, their actual headline measure is personal happiness, and that's their job. The government there feel that their job is to increase the level of happiness in the population. And that leads me on to a couple of other points on measurement. Alex, I promise I'm not making a political point, but you're right that China do emit more than we do now. CO2 does hang around in the atmosphere for hundreds of years, and in fact, if you look over history, the UK has still emitted more CO2 than China. So we still have a large responsibility to address.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to go to Max now with that question. What will the Lib Dems do about economic models?
Thank you. I'll start just by saying the thing that came to my mind when the question was asked was that I remember a Prime Minister not so long ago saying that he wanted to measure whether the nation was doing well based on, based on happiness, general well-being, and that was David Cameron. He remains in the government, but we're still not. In fact, he's come back like Lazarus. But we're still not measuring whether people are happy and treating that as part of how we look at whether we're doing well or not. Bhutan is possibly, it's an extreme example, but I think it is instructive. And the happiness index, I think Finland usually comes top of the happiness index, right? And those Scandinavian countries. But if you ask them why, it's because they're generally happy with the way things work in their country. It doesn't mean they're full of joy and love, although some of them might be, some of them might not be. If you look at the politics of Scandinavia, it's a mixed bag. So what do liberals believe? Well, liberals broadly think that capitalism has done quite a lot of good. It's brought a huge number of people out of poverty around the world, but liberals believe that capitalism has its limits, and we believe in an active state and regulation to ensure that people are not exploited by that. And one of the things that we have at the moment is there is too much power vested in large corporations who are accountable largely to nobody and largely unregulated. Let's look at the water industry as an example of an industry that... An example of an industry that was set up under wide-scale privatisation and then has been fundamentally not regulated at all, seemingly, by Ofwat, the organisation which is supposed to be making sure that sewage isn't pumped into the rivers. Now, there are many other examples where consumers are treated like they are sort of, I don't know, the prey, really, I guess. And you can see that largely in the industries that should be limited because they are natural monopolies. So the utilities are a very good example of all of those. But then there are all kinds of organisations that force advertising down our throats for things that we don't need. And that does fuel some of the demand, which means that we're in a position where we're buying an awful lot of stuff that isn't necessary. I feel that very strongly. I have a 19-month-old baby, and when we put the telly on to watch Channel 5 in the morning, for a little bit of light relief after breakfast, it's pretty much as much time telling us that we should buy plastic things which come with their own huge carbon footprint as much as we get to watch Paddington. And that's a really difficult thing to bear as a parent, because there's a microphone there, I didn't realise. It's a difficult thing to bear as a parent, and liberals believe that there should be limits on that kind of predator activity by companies, because we are sceptical about concentrations of wealth and power, whether that is in the state sector, whether that is in the private sector. I would finish just by saying, while I went along to the Donut Economics event that was at the Wilson, and it was a huge success, and many of the faces in the room tonight I saw there, what I would say is that we shouldn't just say that this new thing is the thing that's going to save us. There's a lot more that must go beneath that, and a lot more actual formal regulation. Donut economics is good. It places a lot of responsibility on individuals. I think the responsibility, we can have a debate about whether it does or not. I read the book. There was a lot of metaphors. But also, the final point is that Malthus has been wrong for hundreds of years. He may be wrong for hundreds of years more. He may not be. Donut economics gives us one way of solving some of those problems.
Thank you. We could pass to Alison, please. Sorry, Julie. No, Julie, sorry.
Julie, me next. Oh, yet again, I'm agreeing with quite a lot of what Max is saying. But I think, again, Labour, with our sort of background in socialist traditions, would take it further, really, that when we reflect on the world that we've lived in for the last some decades, really, one of the social developments that has been striking is the move towards individualism. You know, we had Thatcher saying there is no such thing as society. And I think that's left a lot of people vulnerable, isolated, feeling that any failure is their own fault, and that as communities we don't have a responsibility to look after each other. And it's time that we found that respect for each other and that mutual commitment to each other again. Whether or not we can do that in the context of finding something other than growth to be aiming for, I really don't know, because the world is a pretty challenging place. And it's easy for us, I think, and tempting to think about what we can do as one nation. Alex earlier was saying we're a tiny island. We're, 65 million of us, though. It's a lot of people to get all working in the same direction. But we live in a world which is increasingly challenging. And only today we've got people talking about nuclear weapons being used in Europe in the next 5 years. So, and we have a world where the super rich, and I was looking at this in terms of, who's contributing most to carbon emissions, the super rich are responsible for as much in terms of carbon emissions as 50%, the lowest 50% of society. And those people don't willingly give up their position and their control, and they don't willingly give up their ambitions to be even richer and have even more control than they currently do. So yes, we could be working towards well-being, but we have to recognise that we do that in a context where we've got to work somehow, slowly but surely, to try to reduce the power of those super rich people.
In terms of the super rich, what would Labour do about the super rich, about maybe taxing the super rich?
There's certainly a talk of more of a wealth tax. I think that's still being thought through. But again, partly because what's happened over the last 20 years, particularly in the development of these, are sort of eye-wateringly wealthy people who are, we're not talking about a handful, we're talking about quite large numbers of people with huge economic power, is that it's harder now to control them than it was. And we saw, hate to mention it, Alex, the Liz Truss budget, and we saw the way the financial markets reacted to that. So, that was one attempt to significantly reduce taxation, but anything that starts to spook the markets, for example, can make life very difficult for a national government.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
Would you pass to Alex?
Thank you very much.
Sort of two questions there.
Yeah, sure.
Economic growth and also what about wealth taxing?
Well, yeah, right. Well, so look, I think there were lots of very thoughtful contributions here, and actually, right. So it was David Cameron who came up with the idea of general well-being, and by the way, I think that's a really sensible thing to be looking at, because life is about more than simply pounds, shillings, and pence. It's about the quality of your parks. It's about your cycle lanes. It's about air quality. It's about hospitals and all those sorts of things which are incredibly important. However, I do think we have to be realistic about the fact that in order to deliver so many of those things that make life worth living, the ability to go to a museum and see beautiful art, the ability to come here to get the Keith Nutland concert and listen to beautiful music, a lot of it derives from our ability to generate prosperity for individuals and then generate taxes at the same time. So I was in America recently, and there's no doubt income per capita is significantly higher than in the UK. The starting salary for a police officer in Washington, D.C., I saw was $75,000. Right now, I remember thinking, wow, that's a very, very striking figure. What I also found out when I was speaking to the British ambassador there, or the consul who was showing me around, said that in his neighbourhood, in 2 years, there'd been 7 shootings, 4 of them fatal, one of them with an automatic rifle, and I thought, I prefer Cheltenham, I have to say, because that's an important aspect of the quality of life. But look, I think it is important that we drive up income per capita. So to your point, your proper challenge about deprived communities, the reason why I am so passionate about this whole cyber thing is not just so that we get one over on Gloucester, although that is important. It's because we want to generate wealth in this town. I want to have an opportunity for a young person who was perhaps brought up on the wrong side of the tracks, whose parents may not have worked, whose grandparents may not have worked, but if they're prepared to work hard and prepared to put in a shift, that they could unlock extraordinary potential for them and their family, and also to generate the tax revenue that pays for the £17.2 million Chedworth surgical suite that opened at Cheltenham General Hospital. And also this is a really important point. So I'm in charge of the prisons, it's a poison chalice sometimes, but I'm in charge of the prisons, and we're looking at building new prisons. So HMP Millsyke, fantastic new prison, all electric, what we all want to see, brilliant. The additional cost of making that a green prison is £90 million. £90 million. Now, we could do all sorts of good stuff with £90 million, but my ability to pay for it comes from a country where individuals are going out, doing work, generating money for themselves, their family, and paying in via taxes to our community. So I am unapologetic in saying I want to unlock potential. I want people to drive up income per capita. I want them to pay their taxes, because that is how you best create a great society.
Thank you very much. We'll just pass back to Max for a comment there.
Yeah, on the point about cyber and the Golden Valley development, there were people in the room who think it's a terrible idea and we shouldn't do it. There'll be people in the room who think it's a really good idea because it will bring good quality jobs. And actually, a lot of those jobs, if you talk to the people in the cyber industry, they'll say, we're never going to get to net zero if we don't have cyber security and people working in those industries. But it is important to note that we are building what is going to be a very green development there. It's going to be built to very high energy efficient standards, and it should be something that Cheltenham's going to be proud of. There was an effort to turn that into one of Liz Truss's investment zones, which would have meant that basically all the planning rules and all the work that was done locally by the council, which is the main investor, would have been thrown out the window, and we would have had a development that was built to the same low standards that you see in most business parks across the country. So there is an important point there, that if we're talking about the sort of laissez-faire economics that some people are sceptical of now, we shouldn't be going down that route, and that was a route that Alex's government was taking us down fairly recently.
Thank you. And just a final point on this one to Tabi. Thank you.
Just kind of more of a comment than a question is, I kind of don't feel like the question was really about, like, I mean, I know that's your area of expertise, but I find it amazing that we started out a conversation with, you know, what we're going to do to uplift people. And you mentioned prisons. Like, I don't think that's an appropriate investment. I don't think that's actually going to protect people necessarily. I don't think that's an investment in uplifting people. I don't think prisons are really the answer.
I'd like to now move on to another question from Nikki, which is about river and lake pollution. Is Nikki here? Well, you sent some great questions, so you're here in spirit, even if not in person. So the question here, what is being done locally to tackle the issue of sewage and other chemical pollutants getting into our rivers and lakes? And I think it's fair to start with Alex, because I know that you were quite involved in this. So shall we pass that down to Alex?
It is certainly true, and let's be absolutely clear up front, that I think the behaviour of a number of the water companies has been, as I put it in Parliament, the unacceptable face of capitalism. What I mean by that is particularly creating offshore shell companies as a way of disguising how money runs through a system, runs through accounts, layers of bureaucracy which are designed to evade transparency, and so on. So I do think that there has been a significant market failure in that regard. So that is a fair point. I do believe, however, that it is important to not just say, but actually to do. And so I was very disappointed the fact that we have in Gloucestershire and in Cheltenham a combined sewage overflow. Now, what that means in plain terms, I'm sure you all know this, but basically, when you get runoff, when it rains a lot, that goes into a combined sewage overflow, which is basically a big hole in the ground, which has got a gully, a channel going through it, which carries, sorry to be a bit gross about it, but all the sewage, right? And then when all that water comes in off the hill, particularly off the scarp, that mixes in with that, it causes it to overtop, and either it would lead to homes in Charlton Kings backing up, because I say that because the CSO is just by Dunkerton's, it would lead to it backing up, or it would vent into the River Chelt. Now, I declare an interest, the River Chelt goes through my back garden, I see it every day, but that is completely wrong. Now, this is a system, by the way, which doesn't just exist in England, it exists in Denmark, in Belgium. There are signs if you walk through Belgium saying, please don't flush the loos in heavy rain because it'll end up in the canal. So this combined sewage overflow is not unique to the United Kingdom, and it's existed for decades and decades and decades. But nonetheless, it's not acceptable. And so I got Severn Trent on site and said, you're going to have to sort this out. There was a huge amount of toing and froing, and I spoke to Liv Garfield, who's the chief executive, and I said, you need to stump up. And she has put up, in fairness, about £500,000, which went into a wholly new engineering project, which is near Dunkerton's. Basically, any of you remember your maths, it's a big cylinder, pi r squared times height, huge cylinder volume of overflow. So it catches, in times of heavy rain, it creates a huge tank. The net effect has been that the number of overflows has gone down by 99%. That's the latest readings that have come out. So, of course, there are problems elsewhere in the country, but my job, and indeed the putative members of Parliament's job, is to sort stuff out in your patch. And in our patch, through a lot of hard work, we have an engineering solution, which as far as I know, can't guarantee it, but as far as I know, is far ahead of any other constituency in the country.
Thank you. Pass to Julie. Julie, shall I ask the question again? What's being done locally to tackle the issue?
I have no idea what's being done locally other than what Alex is telling us he's managing to get done. But I think the idea that this is market failure is an interesting concept because as I understand it, each water authority is only owned by one owner, most of whom are not UK based. They're all over the world, from what I've read. And if we take Thames Water as an example, what's happened there is that they've been allowed to borrow huge amounts of money based on the assets that they own, and use that money to pay dividends to shareholders, and then find that they have massive debts, particularly because of interest rates have gone up, and they're now turning to their investors, asking them for extra money, and they're saying no, and saying that you have to actually raise the money from your customers. So somehow the people in Thames Water, and I guess it could well be happening in other water authorities, are paying twice. We've paid once already, and now we're being asked to bail them out. And this is because of a lack of long-term financial planning and investment in the infrastructure.
So nationally, if Labour were to come into power, what would Labour do about water problems?
I don't know, quite honestly, but I think because I'm not they're working on a plan at the moment, but the general move within Labour is to work towards greater public ownership. So they would be looking at what they could do to sort out the ownership of the water authorities. And I think other countries are astonished at the idea that a utility as essential as water is in foreign hands, and most of ours is. So we are looking at it. The plans from Labour are not clear yet. In terms, it's a big issue again. We are, in a number of these areas, taking on what has become a massive change in the way that things are organised. And it's not going to be easy, as Keir Starmer keeps saying. These are big issues. They're not easy ones to solve, and they're not going to be solved overnight. But the intention is there to come up with a system that gives the public much greater control, much greater security in terms of their water supply, and one, again, which respects the needs of water supply users rather than being driven mainly by the interests of shareholders.
Thank you. We'll come to that. What's been done locally to tackle the issues, and what would the Lib Dem stance be?
Julie's set me right up here to deliver the line I was going to deliver, which is we're basically in an elite club of one in terms of countries that have whole-scale privatised our water system and our sewage system. It's a total disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. And there's one thing that the people on the right of politics can't answer, is that they don't want our government to own any of our national utilities and our national infrastructure, but they're absolutely happy for companies based abroad and companies wholly owned by other governments to own our national utilities. Now, if you can answer me that question, if anyone in the room can answer me that question, and Alex possibly might be able to, then they're a better political philosopher than I am, and I don't claim to be a political philosopher. So Alex said spending about 500 grand on that bit of infrastructure in Cheltenham. The government's recent announcement was they're going to give us, as a nation, £11 million extra, so that's about 22 bits of infrastructure to account for the whole of the nation, which doesn't sound like an awful lot to me. And ultimately, we're all going to have to pay for this in our bills. When Thames Water goes bust, maybe Thames Water will end up in public hands again, or maybe some other third sector organisation will take it into its control. But we're all going to have to pay for it, and we're going to have to pay because, I don't know, when I was a child sometime, a long time ago, Margaret Thatcher and the Conservatives decided they were privatising the water industry and making us the one member of that elite club that is willing to put the one thing that keeps us all alive for sure in the hands of private interests. And it's a total disgrace. Our country should hang its head in shame because we've allowed that to happen over a long period of time, and it's completely unacceptable. Alex mentioned that the system exists in other countries and listed a couple of those countries. The system exists because it needs to exist. It is not used to the scale it is used in this country, in other countries. And it's not used to the scale in those countries because they've invested in their sewers. So the sewers can cope with the amount of poo that are going into them and the amount of other sewage that's going into them as well. Our country hasn't done because private companies, which are not regulated properly by Ofwat, which is overseen by the government, have not invested in our sewers. We've all been taken for a ride. And just to finish off, Alex said that the amount of spills going to the Chelt has gone down. If you've gone down to St Peter's Park and smelled it, it's absolutely disgusting. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's instructive, and you see all the things that are on the grills, sanitary pads, tampons, toilet paper, all kinds of things that you don't want to see and shouldn't be in our waterways. But on the statistics, if you go on the recent stats that came out, published by the Environment Agency, spills into the Chelt at Dowd as well between 2022 and 2023 went up tenfold. Now, the infrastructure is going in, and I understand that the infrastructure is going in, and maybe it will go down next year. But that wasn't what we were told was going to happen, and the tenfold increase is something that we shouldn't have to put up with. I've clarified the point, Alex. We know the infrastructure is going in soon, and it might. The spills have gone.
Can we just finish?
The spills have gone up tenfold. It's publicly available data. You can all go home and look at it tonight.
If you've got something that you want to correct, and then we'll come to you, Tabi.
Just on that specific point, in January last year, there was a blockage just upstream of Dowdswell CSO, and that led to more spills. That was before the infrastructure program had taken place. So that huge cylinder that I talked about, that went in the summer of 2023 and was completed in January 24. It's since the installation of that engineering solution that spills have gone down 99%. So just happy to make that clear.
Thank you. Thanks, Tabi. What are your thoughts
So this
from the Green Party perspective too?
Thank you. So actually, kind of excitingly in a way, I've started chairing overview and scrutiny at Cheltenham Borough Council since, of course, I've been chairing overview and scrutiny on Cheltenham Borough Council since last autumn. So we actually did check in with our flooding strategy in the last meeting that we recently had. So we kind of really wanted to make sure that we were checking in regarding our thoughts about the 2007 flooding, trying to mitigate against, other potential extreme flooding situations like that, and also just talking about our drainage systems. So it was quite a good discussion, and I think we got a lot out of it. But it did make me very conscious of the fact that there are some significant limitations. It's been frustrating because, you can't argue that utility companies make a lot of money. In some ways, it's worth kind of examining, just as Julie and Max have said, just the fact that if these utilities make money, then why privatise them? Because it basically means that the money that they generate is basically being used to line shareholders' pockets, and that's kind of it's a bit frustrating and disappointing to see that the purpose of a utility company then becomes to generate wealth for shareholders and not to invest in the Victorian drainways that we have, because they are Victorian. That was pretty much the last time that the ambitious infrastructure development was actually taken on, and it's basically not been upgraded in any meaningful way. We talk about sort of green jobs and upskilling and stuff. Wouldn't it be a great opportunity to, be able to offer people, work in sort of actually kind of planning these things and actually mitigating things before we reach crisis point? It's good to try and deal with big problems while they're still small problems, and try and empower ourselves so we can respond over a longer period of time rather than having to freak out at the last minute and try and get something sorted. So I think that generally it would be well worth trying to be a lot more proactive than we have been, and instead of waiting decades to take action on anything and kind of just let the market regulate and enforce itself, it's just good to have these kinds of checks and balances of power, and just having that kind of again, that sort of oversight and scrutiny that I am quite a big fan of, is just making sure that that's a meaningful engagement, that you're asking the right questions and empowering people who just want to act in the role of a critical friend. I think that's most constructive, really.
Thank you, Tabi. Ian, what do some of your business clients think about what's going on related to water and sewage, and is it impacting their ability to do business? I should say
I'll
that.
be perfectly honest.
Is it impacting their ability to do business?
Yeah. It's not a conversation I have every day,
No,
to be honest,
exactly.
because
I don't think people got the joke, but I did.
Yeah. Sorry. I can't really speak to this in terms of what's being done in any meaningful way. I can only speak as a resident of Cheltenham and as a private citizen. And as a businessman, I'm obviously full square behind the idea of the market economy, and shareholders are allowed to make money out of their business. But I tend to be agreeing with most of the panellists that some things are better off owned by the public, and water is one of them.
Thank you. Thank you very much.